Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. We're so grateful you're here. I'm the Reverend Cheryl Butler, and this is Journey Road Ministries, where we seek to do justice, do kindness, and walk humbly with God. Today is the third Sunday of Easter. Our scripture reading is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, verses 36b through 48. While they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought they were seeing a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you frightened, and why do you doubt? Why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch and see. For a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Then he said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures, and he said to them, "Thus it is written that the Messiah is to suffer and to rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things." Thus ends the gospel reading. So today we're going to hear from the Reverend Mary Dyer.
I expect most of you will remember the childhood game those of us from church played as children. Here's the church. Here's the steeple.
Here is the church. Here is the steeple. Open the doors and see all the people. That's right.
But this past year, the year of COVID, has changed all that. Here's the newer version. Here's the church. Here's the steeple. Open it up. And where's all the people? Before this year, we thought we had it all figured out. Our churches, from vast cathedrals to rental spaces, were physical grounding spaces, where at least once a week, the congregation gathered together, maskless, to worship together, to fellowship, to touch each other, to hug, to eat together. It marked the weekly rhythm of our communal faith life. Then, pow, out of the blue, unexpectedly, all of the rules changed. We were literally gobsmacked. Nothing like this had ever happened before to the Church Universal. Even when a church or a group of churches had been bombed or were going into exile, going into the underground, that somehow found a way to gather physically, body to body, sharing touches and smiles and tears, to continue to celebrate as a Christian or other community of faith. Then this millennial-old pattern was just simply broken asunder with an unknown lethal virus that was largely unknown and with which we also still are dealing. Where were we to go? What would we do? How could we comfort one another when we could not even gather together at the bedside of one of our own who was dying or maybe giving birth? I expect this question of where do we go was virtually the same experience of the disciples who had gathered together at the Last Supper. They didn't know it was the Last Supper. They all believed that it was really the first supper of the new kingdom Jesus had inaugurated when the previous Sunday he walked to a donkey and got on it and rode through a cheering crowd, his path literally covered with palm branches of celebration. It was nearly time, they thought, mistakenly, that Jesus would proclaim a new kingdom. And they were assured, they believed, of places of honor at his right and left hands. They certainly asked often enough. After all, hadn't they given up everything? Their livelihoods, their families, their own comfort and homes, to faithfully follow this mysterious new rabbi who was proclaiming a new reality? It was not long, however, that their dreams were shattered, starting in the Mount of Olives when Judas betrayed his healer, his friend, his teacher, and Jesus was ignominiously dragged off to be put in prison, to be tried and sentenced the next day, to have himself stripped of all of his garments, to have a crown of thorns dug into his head, to be handed his own cross, to proceed ignominiously through the no longer cheering crowds to a lonely hill in Golgotha, where he hung there for hours while people, some disbelieving, others possibly just enjoying it, watching him slowly die. The next day, that day actually, Peter had denied him several times as the script rolled out in a different way than what he had thought. He claimed he had never heard of Jesus, much less being one of his main followers. There was actually only one male disciple that was there, the beloved John, along with Jesus's mother and Mary of Magdalene and other women, to bear witness and to give what support they could to the dying Jesus. And then afterwards, they took his body down and they took it away and cleaned it and anointed it and wrapped it in its shroud, and the tomb was sealed. And they thought that was it. That was all they could do. Some were confused, I expect. All were probably really frightened, not only to what had happened to him, but what might happen to them if anyone found out that had been his followers. Some perhaps might even have been a bit angry, being stripped of their supposed places of honor in the failed new kingdom. They huddled together for comfort in a secret place, having no idea how to get on with their lives. Then Sunday dawned, and various tales from the gospel writers started being told about the tomb being open, Jesus's body being gone, angels in some of the proclamations. What did all of this mean? They thought it was inevitably over, or they would have had to just go on with their former lives. Was any of it even true? Could there be, even after a savage and brutal death, some form of new life beyond their understanding? A way to take up again his healing messages and words? Or did his death just, end it all? They didn't know. It took them a long time to embrace this new ethereal presence of Jesus. This has not been, until this year, the shared millennial old experiences of our various Christian communities. Other than Christmas, Easter is the most celebrated feast of the Christian year. It has been very successfully commercialized, even among Christians. Some of us would attend a Holy Thursday or Maundy Thursday service. The next day would be Good Friday, where the churches would be stripped of all of their garments. Some churches would just clear everything of any decorative thing out because they were celebrating, well, maybe that's not even the right word, no, they were acknowledging the death of Jesus. And then, puff, as soon as midnight in some traditions, I remember going to Easter Mass at midnight at the Trappist Abbey near my home, we would proclaim the risen Christ, or maybe wait until sunrise service the next day. Then would come the Easter bunny with chocolate ears. I always felt bad eating them. The Easter egg hunt, the humongous Easter midday dinner, and life would go on as before, knowing that our Jesus the Christ had truly risen. COVID's stripped us of all of that certainty. It had broken into Lent last year, when then exponentially exploded as the Lenten years fit onto Easter. More and more people dying of COVID each day, as church after church after church closed its doors and masks became the routine, social distancing becoming the new word of the day. Would COVID ever be contained? Would we ever be able to gather again without fear, being able to actually hug one another, to see each other's full faces? That is particularly dear to me since I am deaf and have to rely on lip reading. Would the church again look exactly the way it was before it was all shut down? Well, the answer is, thankfully, no. We were forced out of our shells, our safe walls, into the world, forced to learn Zoom, all sorts of technology forced upon our possibly nervous and possibly unwilling pastors, recording homilies, doing bodiless visits, doing very small socially distant gatherings, even if that. And we could not go back to the way we were: safe, secure, sheltered, solipsistic. I myself believe that COVID has been a very well veiled invitation. So rather than wish for the good old days where the rules and customs were simple and dependable and predictable. So what is our process? It's sort of an invisible process that's hard to picture, to grasp it visually or viscerally. And yet I've been hanging on to a picture of a cat. There you see it. The cat, as cats do, and we actually have like 10 or 12, 5 of which are inside. They're usually in something like this, feeling safe and confined. And yet this one, you can see it's sort of sticking out. It doesn't have a lot of itself still inside. And this cat doesn't look very happy. So I would imagine it's thinking, okay, I need to go on to something bigger. But the church really is like that cat. We've put ourselves into comfortable positions. We've understood what church is. It's sort of like a box, and we go there probably most Sundays, and it's all just been played out. And then we do our little Sunday duty and just go off to the rest of the week feeling satisfied and as if we've done our duty. And yet the church, sort of like this cat, got shoved off. Just imagine the cat flying somehow onto the ground and the vase shattering. and the cat has nothing. And so that's where we are now. We have been forcefully, by a dangerous, unknown, deadly virus, out of our comfort level. And so I just think that maybe this is a key to understanding what we need to do right now. We can't put the vase back together as much as we might want. It reminded me also of a trip that Cheryl and I took to a museum in Chicago a few years ago, and they had great exhibits, lots of archaeological exhibits, the Egyptian room, one of the early planes hanging across the ceiling in its full glory. And yet what really attracted me most was a very simple exhibit that just had a bunch of chicken eggs under a heat lamp. And I just focused on one as I could see the egg beginning to move. And I just sat there, and I was literally not a midwife because I didn't have to do anything, but I was a witness to this beautiful, magical moment as it kept pecking and pecking. And finally the shell showed a little bit of an opening, and then it kept pecking. Who knows how it knew what to do. And finally, exhausted, you see this fresh chick lying on the ground, puzzled, exhausted, wet, temperature changing. Poor little guy. I hope he became a pet. It's another story. So I actually wrote a poem about this chick. It had such a profound influence on me. Birthing's hard. Egg tooth pecking in the dark, cracking obdurate shell, golden fractal lines of newborn light hinting at things to come. One last lunge breaks asunder the pressing ovoid wall. Sprawled in moist and yellow shards of former home, the chick, exhausted, lays down its still yoked head, closing its eyes in sleep, to wake refreshed, ready for the bright new day. It was only the chick's job to just lie there, having the air dry it, and then as it regained its energy, learning to wobble on its little legs and to somehow get over to the pile of seeds waiting for it to learn how to peck out his breakfast. But sometimes it's even harder than that. There's another picture that captured me even more when I thought about COVIDs and the church. It's a picture of a lizard. I couldn't even understand it at first. It looked like one lizard was swallowing another lizard who was very stoically awaiting its fate of continuing to be swallowed. But it's not. That lizard you see that's brown is actually shedding its skin. That's the old skin, and it's much harder and more difficult than that chick. It would take days for most animals, like snakes. They don't eat, they don't move, they're simply there, slowly having the old skin flake off them before they can move on with a new life. That kind of shedding happened also in World War II. I'm a history buff, and I am fascinated lately. I've been reading about Churchill during the first year of the fight against the Germans and then the Japanese. And the Germans wanted to subjugate England. That was the last country before the United States joined after World War II that stood against them. They'd already conquered Norway and Poland and Hungary and Austria. And there was this one little island very close to them that was close enough to be bombed on a regular basis. And so they were. And one of the targets wasn't just like the industrial places or the places where the British were trying to build, battleships or airplanes or machine guns or something. It was the churches, because the heart of the people was there. And so one night, one clear moonlit night in 1942, they attacked a small town of Coventry outside of London. They almost destroyed it, but they did destroy the Coventry Cathedral, which was a pride, a gem for all of England. You see here what was left. The walls, all of the stained glass windows have been blown out, so you can see outside. The cross itself was charred by the fire that the bombs caused. The altar itself is still there, and that was all that was left. There was no more any church for them to go to. And yet their life had to go on. The next year, look at this picture. You see that the church was basically still destroyed. They managed to clear the rubble out, but they couldn't really hold services there. But they did have this one service where they installed the newest bishop of Coventry. And after the installation in that bombed out place, you see them all processing out into the world. The physical structure had been destroyed. At that point, nobody had a clue who was going to win the war. They had air raids every night. They were sheltered in bomb shelters. And there they are, taking over the space because they were the church, not the church, with the people inside, but the church going out and continuing to preach, to meet. And so from the midst of this rubble, new life emerged. And that's exactly what we are doing now. We're still coping with the effect of COVIDs and how we do church outside of church. And we don't have all the answers, but we have a lot more answers than we did a year ago. We've learned to Zoom. Well, many pastors have learned, probably unwillingly, a lot of technical things they never had to think about before. We do meetings that way. We have recorded and live services, which is what ours is. They're available to anyone at any time, even those who wouldn't or couldn't actually come to the physical church, like shut-ins that have been pushed to the side of our consciousness, or people that are sick or chronically ill, or perhaps even just away. So this last Sunday, my spouse Cheryl was presiding over communion in her home church in San Francisco. And you can see a picture here. And the picture of the broken bread for that service is not in San Francisco. Cheryl wasn't either. She was actually in our living room while I was having my postprandial Sunday nap. And so she did the communion service from our living room. We were over 2,000 miles away for a student church, but our beliefs and our outreach have both expanded as an unintended blessing of COVID's. Jesus, both in spirit and in the incarnational form of bread and wine, is doing something to remove all of the perceived barriers that we thought kept him in his own box, like the cat had. We are not the building. We've never been the building. It is us, the living, breathing followers of Jesus, that continue to be forced sometimes to step out into new understandings and expanded hearts. And we will. Hallelujah. Okay, and then the song. Give that